To this now, farm workers organisation, the Ubuntu Rural and Youth Movement, says according to sectoral determination in the agricultural sector, children from the age of 16 years are allowed to work on farms. This while the Constitution considers a person under the age of 18 to be a child. A labour expert says that up to 70% of all children in child labour in South Africa are on farms.
By the Department of Labour found that around 60% of children that are working do so to assist their guardians financially. The Ubuntu Rural Women and Youth Organisation says the sectoral determination in agriculture makes provision for children to be employed. Children of farm workers, in particular, tend to be employed on farms. The organisation says children should be allowed to go to school, and if they so choose, they should seek employment on farms from the age of 18 only.
Sectoral determination, they set minimum wages and conditions of employment allow that farm worker children between the ages of 15 or 18 to work on the farm, or any child between these ages. Now for us that's a contradiction with the Constitution that says any person up to the age of 18 is considered a child. Even though the sectoral determination speaks of 35 hours and not being exposed to hazardous work, it's still child labour.
Labour attorney Michael Bagram says while the country is doing its utmost to root out the problem of child labour, the majority of children in employment work on farms across the country.
The problem is that people often don't know that child labour is not allowed. Many of the farmers abuse the situation. We know that in terms of the basic conditions of Employment Act, it's 15 is the cutoff, 15 years old is the cutoff, or leaving school. So if the person is still at school, if the child is still at school, and they're going to be at school until they're 16, then they can't use them under the 15 years old. That cannot be allowed in this country. It is, and unfortunately it is a real problem.
Bagram says the International Labour Organization has taken up the matter globally. The agricultural body in the province, Agri Western Cape, says it's not aware of any incidents regarding child labour.
In the Western Cape, farms are regularly visited by Department of Labour and Employment to do audits. And from Agri Western Cape side, we urge our members to stay within the confines of the law.
The 5th Global Conference on the Elimination of Child Labour ended this week with a renewed call for everyone to play their part in ending child labour. Mariska Botha, SABC News, Cape Town.
Now, the 5th Global Conference on the Elimination of Child Labour in Durban ended yesterday. The International Labour Organization says all relevant stakeholders, including government, business and civil society, have contributed recommendations towards a Durban Call to Action document. General public has also been called upon to play their role by reporting incidents of child labour, while the children also made their voices heard. Now, let's discuss this further. We're now joined by the DG's at the Department of Employment and Labour, Director General, of course, Thobile Lamati. Mr. Lamati, thank you so much for your time. You joining us, obviously, via telephone. Now, of course, the conference ended yesterday with this very important document called the Durban Call to Action, which was adopted by delegates that attended the conference. Talk to me about exactly what the call to action is, particularly as you look at the UN, deadline of 2025 that basically says that we have to at least have had eliminated child labour by that time.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. The Durban Call of Action is actually asking for a scaled-up action to ensure that the decent work deficit, which contributes to child labour, the situation is improved. That's the first thing, because we know that if those that are working are not paid decent work, are not treated well, and occupational health and safety in the workplace is not observed, then that exacerbates poverty. and children will then be tempted, or parents will be tempted to send their children to go out and work to supplement the income. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the conference was emphatic in terms of calling for the farming sector, the agricultural sector, to end child labor, because we all know that child labor is highly prevalent in that sector. The third thing is that the conference spoke about the need the need to prevent and also promote the elimination of child labor through policies, informed policies and programmatic responses. The fourth thing is that the conference was emphatic about was the right to education. We know that kids should be at school, they should not be working. So the conference was very emphatic on that. The fifth point was universal access to social protection. We know that some of the reasons that are cited by the children and also their parents as a reason why they would send their kids to work is that there is no money, and the kids are saying there is no food at home, and therefore they cannot go to school and sit at school when their stomachs are empty. And that is why it is important that social protection goes hand in hand with education, because some of us may take lightly the importance of feeding schemes at schools. It goes a long way in keeping children at school, instead of them being there trying to find work and so that they can put food on the table. And the last point that was raised emphatically was increased financing and international cooperation for the elimination of child labor and forced labor. What we are saying here is that there are NGOs who are involved in activities that are aimed at eliminating child labor. We want the corporations and multinationals to put money, on the table so that those activities that are aimed at eliminating child labor continue. So we're calling here for support. Besides the initiatives that governments are taking, we're calling for corporations to also play their part. So those are the 6 fundamental focus areas that form the thrust of the call to action at a document from Durban.
Now, DG, of course, I was at the conference. I attended about 2 days of the 6-day conference, and you raised very important points. And another point that was raised outside of the education and the social protection element was, of course, youth unemployment. I'd like us to focus on the agricultural environment, because this was also raised during the 3rd installment of the Imbizo of President Cyril Ramaphosa yesterday, saying that in terms of forced labor, this is still a problem where you find that farm dwellers are still being ill-treated, and living in very harmful environments in this country. Now, we know, from the UN in terms of those stats that out of the 165 million children that are forced into labor, 70% globally are in the agricultural sector. But in Africa, that number is 80%. That's obviously out of the 92 million children that are, in child labor in the African continent. Now, in as far as the South African government is concerned, where it pertains to child labor and particularly forced labor, what are you doing in as far as that sector is concerned?
We work as government, we have taken a 3-pronged approach. One, of course, because the Basic Conditions of Employment Act outlaws the child labor and also forced labor. And also the Children's Act that is administered by Social Development outlaws forced labor. We work very, very closely with the Department of Social Development and Department of Employment and Labor, because we think that for us, removing children in the child labor, forced labor situation is not going to help if the reason that drove those kids into that situation are not addressed. And that is why we work very closely with social development. And we also work very closely with Department of Education, because we think that once these kids are removed from this environment, they should be at school, but they should be supported, and that's why social protection is key. But the third element to it is that this is an offense, and anything that is an offense has to be dealt with by South African police services. So it's a criminal act, and therefore the law enforcement agencies have got to play their role. So that's precisely what government is doing. But as a government, we have what we call the Child Labour Action Program, which also brings on board stakeholders such as business and community, so that those two can also play an active role in the eradication of both child labor and forced labor.
DG, just as we wrap up the conversation, I mean, you are calling for the public to also play their role as communities to try and also raise the alarm in as far as child labor is concerned. Now, in the previous story that we've just broadcast here on the show, we're saying that the Farm Workers Organization, the Ubuntu Rural and Youth Movement, says there is a contradiction in far as the Constitution as well as the determination in the agricultural sector is concerned. Now, the sectoral determination in the agricultural sector says children from the age of 16 years old are allowed to work in farms, but the Constitution defines that, or considers a person under the age of 18 to be a child. So where do you as a Department of Labour stand?
Well, the Basic Condition of Employment Act defines what constitutes a child labor, and it says that a child, if you are at the age of 15, you are allowed to work. Any child who's younger than 15 is not allowed to work, and these regulations and these laws are checked by the Department of Justice to make sure that they do not contradict the Constitution. Now, what we're saying is that even though the children that are at the age of 15 are allowed to work, the work that they do must not be in such a way that it has a negative impact on their in their upbringing. Secondly, on their their development cognitively, and also should not result in any psychosocial, challenge as a result of these kids being exposed to whatever they are doing. So at the age of 15 and above, you are allowed to work. And that is why we also have another piece of legislation that allows children in performing arts to work. Those kids that you see on TV doing adverts, they are allowed to work because that what they are doing is part of allowing them to grow. For instance, if they are acting, it also allows them to grow in that direction, and not unless whatever they are doing threatens or will seem to have an impact on their cognitive upbringing, then that will be a problem. So we do issue license or registration certificates to companies that want children to work. So as far as we're concerned, there are no contradiction at all.
Lamati is the Director General at the Department of Employment and Labour. Thank you so much for